Hi class, welcome to Aztecs, Incas, and Mayas. This is Unit 1, and this is a presentation 1.A. This is the introduction to the Aztec world, which will be new for some of you. There's a lot of new information, and so this is a presentation that will kind of lay everything out for you at a beginning level and introduce you to the topic. Most American students don't have a lot of knowledge of the Aztec world. They probably have in their minds pyramids, maybe human sacrifice, maybe fantastic costumes or dancers you might see in Southern California where I lived. I would see them all the time. But as far as academic information beyond that, we don't usually have a lot as American students. So this is a new topic and one that I have to lay out for you so you can get the most out of it. So here we go. Introduction to Aztecs, the basics, the early histories, and kind of the physical layout of the area. We're going to go over a few terms. We're going to use them interchangeably, sometimes specifically. The term Aztec, first of all, refers to an imperial alliance. It's a political alliance between Tenochtitlan, Tlacopan, and Texcoco. So it is not necessarily at the time a word used to refer to all the people in the area. But now it is. It came under usage since the Spanish conquest. So it's okay to use the term Aztec for all of them, but be aware it refers to a specific political alliance. Nahuatl, as you can see that word up here on this slide, refers to the language that they spoke. There's slight disagreement on whether you pronounce the L at the end of a term. In the school I went to, we did not pronounce the L when TL occurs at the end. But if you do, if you don't, either way, I just want you to know that is something. So Nahuatl is the language that they spoke, and an academic term, a term that the people did not use to refer to all the folk who lived in central Mexico, is in English Nahuas, and that's trying to refer to them as the people who spoke Nahuatl rather than as Aztecs, since not all of them were part of the political empire. So here's just some pronunciation basics for you. When you see an X in Nahuatl, it gives us the sh sound. In the book, they give us xochitl as the word for flower, and that's how you pronounce the X. The CH, by the way, not on our slide, is the same as the CH in Spanish, the che. The Z in Nahuatl gives us the S sound. The TZ, it gives us a Z sound. And again, TL at the end of the word is either T or TLA. Also, the accent is on the next to last syllable. So one word I will do here to finish the slide is the god of the main Aztec god, Huitzilopochtli is how you would say that. And that was in fact a question on my oral exam to get a PhD in Latin American history. So those are some of the basics. The term Aztec, Nahuatl, and Nahuas, and some pronunciation kind of get us moving forward. Now this gives us a map of the Aztec Empire at the end of its time period in 1519, and I want to point out on this slide a few elements. By 1519, you can see in the tan color that the empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. Its main focus is the yellowish color, and that's the Central Valley of Mexico, today's Mexico City. The Mexica city, which is the center of the empire, is Tenochtitlan. And you can see the green arrow showing us where that is. So it was very large by 1519, but when we start our story, just the areas within the yellow or orange area are the Native American societies and city-states that are involved in the story. So as we zoom in to that yellow area, to the map of Mexico Valley, by the end of this presentation, the Mexica, which is one ethnic group, who again will become rulers of the empire, they end up on an island in the middle of the lake. So Lake Texcoco, as you can see represented there, with Texcoco on the right, Tlacopan, Azcapotzalco on the left, Culhuacan down there below. That's all a lake, and the lines leading to the island are in fact causeways. They are roads, if you will, built on top of the lake. So the geography of this area was one that is a valley. It's surrounded by tall volcanoes and other mountains where the snow falls, and that snow melt and rainfall, when it occurs, goes down into the valley to this lake. This is a dead lake. It doesn't flow out. There are no outlets to this lake. But the populations from before 1000 BCE began to use the snowmelt in this area to create irrigation. And from 1000 BCE to about 1000 BCE, we see the development of an agriculture based on this irrigation. It will be this agricultural development that will lead to larger populations in this area. This brings me to a point where we should raise something very interesting about Native American studies throughout the Americas. For most American students, they would be unaware that in terms of numbers, the numbers of people, if you ask them what did the most common or the majority of Native Americans, how did they live, what did it look like? Because they don't think about the Andes in the Inca Empire and central Mexico here in the Aztec period, they forget that the majority of Native Americans, in terms of people, the number of people, would have lived in urban settings. They would have lived in stone buildings. They would have had large, complex societies that they were a part of. It is not that other areas, such as the Powhatans in modern-day Virginia, or perhaps the Shoshone in modern-day Nevada, didn't know how or couldn't pull off what these two areas did. The information about maize agriculture certainly spread, but they just didn't have the capabilities from the land, the geography, the climate, and the rest to create these large populations. But the Andes Mountains in South America and Central America, especially the Central Valley of Mexico, this is an area where this did happen. So large urban populations emerged, complex societies, religions, and even empires themselves. And it's coming from this. And surprising in some ways because this area is, in anthropological terms, still in the Stone Age somewhat. They're still in the Paleolithic period because they haven't developed a lot of metallurgy. They haven't gone into Bronze or Iron Ages. But in some ways, they're also partially Neolithic in that they've had this agricultural revolution. So it's a little mix of both. But it's super interesting that this developed the way it did and as large as it did, because it did so without the wheel or the use of the wheel. And again, without this ability to work metals in a productive way, and without large game or domesticated animals as well. So the chapter introduces us to the migrations, the myths, and whether the Mexica, which is the focus of our study, were barbarians or not. So the mythical story of origins has the Mexica coming from Oxtlan, meaning the place of herons, and then eventually getting to the seven caves, Motztoc, and this is very similar. The first part is quite a Mexica part of the story, but the second place, the seven caves, this was common to other migratory groups, to their stories of how they become civilized. And civilized in their terms, not in my terms. And that would be using maize agriculture and not being a hunter-gatherer, building stone houses, and speaking Nahuatl, like everyone else in the valley. So historically, the Mexica arrive by about the 1300s, like many others have done, and their migration story, whether it's historical or not, isn't provable one way or the other. But the importance for me as a historian is that it shows the Mexica's understanding of themselves and how they want to portray that they went through a process by which they used to be less civilized but have now become civilized, and that they went through that process just like everyone else did. Now, the two terms used in the time period to talk about if you were civil, you weren't a part of the civilized majority, were chichimec and tamime. The first word is somewhat pejorative from the point of view of the settled people in the Central Valley of Mexico, and it suggests that you're a nomadic hunter, you're a barbarian, you don't quite know how to live a settled life. While tamime is, in fact, a halfway point where you're not quite civilized, but you're not quite barbaric. And the information that we do have, although not overwhelming in its number, the information we do have seems to strongly point to the Mexica as being that second. They had developed some of the behaviors and cultural expressions of the civilized groups. For example, in these pictographs, we see at the upper left the Mexica leaving Aztlan, and that's part of their origin story. It shows us they're doing this in the year 1 Flint. We'll get to the years later. If you look at the upper left, I'd like to describe Mexican documents a bit. Those cool footprints that I like so much, that shows movement of the person. And then above, you can see these little candy canes or shepherd hooks. That represents speaking or voice or language. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. I won't go further into this actual part of what it's saying, but to remind you or to show you that this is a representation of the Mexica leaving Aztlan, the place of herons. Down below, we can see that the Mexica are carrying their gods with them, and we can see the footprints of them moving. And then to the right, we have a representation of those 7 Ks of Chicomotztoc that I talked about. And you can see 7 caves inside this building, and this would be an example of how they are that in between tamime, because on the lower left we can see they are carrying the appropriate gods, they have the supplies they need, they are in fact observing the 52-year century or cycle called the New Fire Ceremony, and as we can see in this slide on their long migration, they are remembering to sacrifice certain individuals to Huitzilopochtli, their god. So overall, we see that in the migration moment, the Mexica from the 1100s to the 1300s eventually make their way into the valley and are adjusting their culture to speaking Nahuatl and observing religion in the way similar to the others. And so Aztecs, as a result of this information, seem to be, not going from barbarian to civilized in the way people use the terms then, in a matter of years, but it's a long process. So they do worship Huitzilopochtli, and then begin to try and marry into the dynasties that already exist in the valley, and this is a way to create legitimacy among your group. So they marry into the Colwell dynasty. If you go back to the slide of the map of the city, they were kind of at the bottom or the southern end of Lake Texcoco. A famous story where they flayed the princess. I'll let you read about that. It's a kind of a statement by the Mexica that they have arrived. They're going to marry into the dynasty, but they also defy the dynasty by killing the princess and skinning her alive, and then having a priest dance with her skin on top of him. This led to their expulsion from Culhuacan by force to an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, which we saw on the previous map, where the priests said that Huitzilopochtli told them that they need to look for an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus, which they found. And so on the island in the lake, they call this Tenochtitlan, which means place of the fruit of the prickly pear cactus. And their origins from migration to settlement have occurred according to their story. Now, there is some element of historical accuracy in all of this. With the information we have, we can't nail it down the way we would today, the history of the Kennedy administration or anything. But the generalities are definitely there. Here is a codex that you should know, because it kind of helps set up the beginnings of the Aztec Empire. This is from the Codex Mendoza. It was written shortly after the conquest by Native American nobles who laid out the history of the valley for the Spanish conquerors. And this page shows the foundation in what we now call 1325, the foundation of Tenochtitlan. They knew 1325 as the year two house. And if you look on the upper left, you can see two discs and a house. So I'm going to go through the calendar briefly so you can kind of see how it works. There are 13 numbers and 4 symbols that repeat. 2 house, if you look up there, turns into 3 rabbit, which turns into 4 flower, which turns into 5 flint, then 6 house, and you can see it starts to repeat. In this way, with 4 and 13, they don't repeat themselves until, look at the very bottom of the screen and towards the right, 2 flower. 2 flower is down there at the bottom and has a special symbol. I'll get back to that in a bit. So in 1325, this is their representation of the Mexica nobles. There's about 10 of them sitting around the 4 portions of their city-state, which we'll go into what its term is later. Down at the bottom, they have conquered 2 city-states, Culhuacan and Tenochtitlan, to establish their dominance. And around those 4 units up at the top, which in the middle is the eagle perched on the prickly pear cactus, they're surrounded by water. Down there on the bottom again, that's the new fire ceremony that we're going to get to later in the year 2 flower, and that's going to be kind of a cool part of their culture and religion. Now, after being established on the island in about 1325, for about 100 years, they were under the influences of larger city-states, especially Azcapotzalco and Tepaneca, which is a region. That was the dominant city-state of the Valley of Mexico for the first 100 years of Mexica experience in the Valley of Mexico. But after the retirement and death of Tetzotzomoc, Tenochtitlan allied with 2 other city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan, to take over the region and become the empire. And that they did. So for about 100 years, after 1425 and 1428, Tenochtitlan rules the region that we saw at the beginning. And in the readings, you'll see a layout of the dynasty from Acamapichtli down to Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, and that is the dynastic family that rules over the empire. So we won't have a multiple choice test on all of their names, but I do want you to notice that there are 2 Moctezumas, and so Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, which is the final, well, not the final, but is the emperor when the Spanish arrive. He is the second, and Xocoyotzin is kind of like a diminutive. It's like junior, and that's what that means. When we look at the settlement, and again, we're kind of looking at geography of Tenochtitlan, we're zoomed in now surrounding this odd shape, which is an island. It's actually two or more islands kind of pushed together. You could imagine it to be blue and water. In the middle, the biggest area is the central ceremonial area, and the temple, the major temple, Templo Mayor, which is a Spanish term, obviously, kind of dominated this sacred space. There were many other parts to it. There was a sun temple. They copied other temples, like from Teotihuacan. There was at Zompantli, which is a rack of skulls, of human skulls. At any rate, they even had one of those ball courts that some of you have learned about from Central America studies. So this was a religious and cultural center of the empire, and around it are palaces of emperors. There's even more than this map is showing you. On the right of number one, there were some others from older emperors. So the closer you were to this central place, the more important you were, the higher status you had. And as you can see, number four, there's a Siwakoat, which is the advisor to the emperor, kind of a vice emperor residence as well. Moving to the north is actually a different city-state, even though it's the same city-state, we'll explain that later, is the ceremonial area of the sub-unit, Tlatelolco. And in 6, we have a famous marketplace. There are other marketplaces on this map, but the largest and most important was definitely up there at number 6. This whole area is downtown Mexico City today, not more than 20 or 30 blocks from the central location of downtown, which is right around numbers 1, 2, and 3, 4. So as you move away from the ceremonial center, then nobles would live as close as they could, and then as you move out towards the edges of the island, the Masewal, or the commoners, would live. And again, by 1519, about 200 to 250,000 inhabitants lived in this area. This is a close-up from your book of what is inside the ceremonial center. And again, it's full of religious buildings and religious elements like the Zompantli. The emperor or other important people did not live inside this walled, important area. So, but around it we have the empire on the outside. So, moving out away from the center, our last slide of this presentation to show you generally, this is a representation, not a perfect map, not an archaeological map, of when you went out to the commoners. So imagine between the footpaths, you can see there's footprints. That would be the street, and on either side of the street you have the family houses. But the family houses were 2 to 4 usually, family houses with a patio between them. So you'd enter into the patio, and then the families, which were all part of one family, would share the patio and have the family houses. And then you can see as you move away from the footpath towards the lake, notice the canals is the wavy lines showing where the water is, then a family would have their set of chinampas. As an important note, this chinampa was not a large enough unit to provide them with the food they needed. Most likely and more common, this chinampa gave them fresh food, fresh vegetables, fresh herbs, and they got their corn and their squash and their chilies, maybe even, from the marketplace itself. So this is kind of the geographical layout on the edges of town. So this gives us our foundational understanding of the Mexica, their mythical origins, their travels, their migrations, their establishment from 1325 to 1519, the two different time periods, one in which they're not ruling, the one in which they did, and then again kind of the geographical layout of the city by 1519. So the next episode will be on the economic foundations of the Mexica and how that ran. So see you there.